Hello, AAMI friends and colleagues. How's everyone today? Woo! Feel the energy. And again, congratulations to all our awardees. So, it is my pleasure today to introduce the final keynote speaker of AAMI eXchange 2023, Herman McKenzie. Herman is currently the Director, Department of Engineering in the Standards Interpretation Group of the Joint Commission. In this role, he leads the standards interpretation and customer support activities relative to the life safety and environment of care standards. Mr. McKenzie also managed all activities associated with the daily operations of the engineering department, provides standards interpretation and education to the Joint Commission surveyors and accredited organizations, reviews equivalency requests and survey reports, conducts surveys and Intracycle Monitoring conference calls, serves as faculty for educational programs, and is a speaker for national, regional, state, and local audiences. Herman has more than 25 years of experience in healthcare, having held managerial and directorial roles in clinical engineering, plant operations, and facility services in the Chicago area. He is a past president of the Healthcare Engineers Society of Northern Illinois and is a member of the American Society of Healthcare Engineering, also known as ASHE. Please join me in welcoming Herman to the stage. Hello.
Thank you, thank you.
Down. Have a seat, have a seat. So, Herman, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Heidi.
So we had some questions that were submitted in advance by AAMI members, and I'm going to ask you some of those questions. And some of them are tough. Are you ready for this?
I think I'm ready.
Okay.
I had a good night's sleep.
Oh, good.
And didn't party too much yesterday.
Okay, well, that's a plus. I can't say the same for myself, but anyway, we'll go. And at the end, if we do have some time, we are going to open up the questions for you from the audience. So be thinking if you have some additional questions. Hopefully we'll have time for that at the end. Okay, so let's get this started. So is TJC planning any changes to the current medical equipment standards?
Yes, we are. Actually, this is very timely. We are changing our AEM requirements. So we are removing them from the manual. Don't despair. You still can have an alternate equipment maintenance program. What we have done, looking at streamlining anything that we have in our manual, if all possible, if it doesn't crosswalk to a CMS condition of participation, we're looking if we need to have it in our manual and remove it. So the authority or the allowance to have an AEM was not part of either an NFPA code or a condition of participation. So we're removing that language from our standards. But as I said before, let me reiterate, organizations will still have an opportunity to institute an alternate equipment maintenance program. Your organizations will be given supplemental information in addition to our standards that provides the guidelines and the guidance for the things that you need to have. Now, those of us who've already had compliant AEM programs, just keep doing what you're doing, stay compliant. For those of us who may be new or looking to institute an AEM program, number one, connect with those who are already compliant. But as I said before, we're going to provide information. We're not going to leave you hanging. So thanks for the question.
Okay, I imagine we might have some questions about that afterward, but let's go to the next question then. So what is the latest stance by TJC for relocatable power taps? You never hear about this one. RPTs. This might be a new one for you. And this person has said, I am still seeing this being wildly interpreted from site to site.
Well, I vow to make this my shortest answer. There is no change.
Yay. Okay.
So just to supplement that, if you believe that you're seeing interpretations that deviate from what the code says, you have an opportunity to submit a question to either myself or my team to please provide the specifics. That way we can address the specifics. I know for some of us, we may feel that, when you present a question, contextually it may seem the same, but provide as much specific data as you can. So,
okay.
But there's been no change.
Okay. So this is a long one. So why don't survey teams physically inspect Biomed shops? Some hospital house HCM professionals in places that are not, they basically are in places that are not fit, this person says, for the services being provided. Knowing that TJC will inspect the shop during a survey could go a long way to help BMETs get out of a mechanical and other cramped spaces.
Sure.
That got
I hear some testimonial groans.
Yes, that got some reaction.
Or sighs. So yeah, I can empathize with this. My first, when I first started, boy, I had to go to mechanical space, try to avoid hitting my head on pipes, go through the wheelchair storage, and to end up in a telephone closet. So let me answer it this way. Biomed shops in and of themselves are not part of our survey process. Now, if you have a piece of mechanical equipment or infrastructure that supports the whole hospital that's located in a biomed shop, for instance, part of your medical gas system, a compressor, or something of the like, and our surveyor has to go to the biomed shop to see it, we will come upon that. But biomed shops in and of themselves are not part of the survey process. Now, let me address the question and hopefully be helpful. Inspecting biomed shops is really not the purview, or any shop for a matter. Trust me, I've worked in hospitals where the physical therapists were congregated in an area that was not suitable. They had over a dozen physical therapists, and the space was probably built for at least only five or six. And so I want to show empathy. If you have a working condition in which you feel is not appropriate, actually you shouldn't go to the Joint Commission. Those types of issues are covered by other regulatory agencies, specifically OSHA. And so, I empathize with you, but to answer the question, unless you have a piece of mechanical equipment in which we need to look at as part of the survey process, it's not likely that we would go to a biomed shop. But I do understand the difficulty in working in a space that's just not comfortable.
Okay, great. Okay, so what do you do if you do not agree with the findings of a surveyor? For example, a lot of the standards are sometimes open for interpretation, and say a previous survey didn't find a problem with an issue, but another one does. How is the best way to handle that situation?
Sure. So let me give you 3 ways to do that. If you have a question and you believe or an issue that you believe is subject to personality interpretation, you can submit a question. You can submit and ask for either a phone response or an email response. I always recommend that you ask for an email response, and I'll tell you why. Many times people, when they give me a phone response, but they don't put the best time to call them. All right, and we are limited to the amount of attempts that we can make to reach you by phone. So if we've called you, we will make at least 2 attempts to call you by phone. But I know that you're working professionals. You're out on the floors doing work, right? So if you really want a telephone response, it's best to put give us a time frame to respond, and we will honor that. Now, let's talk about the other way that you can ask for a response. And actually, you go to the Joint Commission website and submit this. You can ask for an email response, which I think a lot of people prefer. And the reason why you prefer it is because you have your answer in writing. And you can share it with your colleagues. And I know I have to do the research. If there's a code issue, I have to give you the proper code reference, etc. And that's just not me, that's my team. And we know as soon as we hit send and you receive that, that's going to go on the shop bulletin board, right? Because that's what I would do, all right? Or if someone is contesting a point of view that you have, you can show them in writing. So that's outside any survey event, all right? I want you to know you have that avenue. So let's look at a survey event. You have a survey event, or one of our surveyors comes on site and believes you're not compliant with one of our requirements. As part of the survey, you can ask for a phone call with the central office, all right? You can ask for that, and our surveyors will set it up. Now, if it involves some code research, they're going to we ask that you give us time to do some research. Now, we may know a lot off the top of our head, but we want to give you the best answer. And also, it's a matter of convenience. So A surveyor may call in the morning or whatever time and say, look, I have a customer, I think they're not compliant with a certain issue, and they believe they are. And they want like a discussion with you. And they will prep us and give us the background, and then we will set up a time that's convenient for our staff in the central office, the surveyor, and the customer. And we can talk through that issue. And believe it or not, it's not meant to be adversarial, and our surveyors will know that there are times where, it's overturned, all right? So that's another way. So that's the second way. The third way, I understand in the heat of a survey, there's a lot of anxiety, right? And you may not want to come across as being antagonistic with the surveyor. So you may think you have a point, but you maybe want to do another additional research. You have what they call the clarification period, and that is 10 days after you receive your final report, you can submit a clarification indicating, look, I was cited for such and thus. At the time of the survey, I believe we were compliant. And we will review that. Now, there's I'm going to give you a caveat with that. If it's a matter of documentation, we ask that you submit the documentation at the time of survey, all right? Please, if a surveyor asks for documentation, and actually our surveyors will even issue an IOU, for instance. We do document review many times as one of the first things as part of the survey process. And let's just say you have a personal issue that you don't arrive at your site, 7:38 in the morning. So the surveyor may say, look, I'm going to take a break for lunch, give this documentation to me before I start the second part of the survey at 1 o'clock. That surveyor may not ask you anymore, right? So it's important that you give it to the surveyor that issued the IOU. Now, if this is requested from a life safety code surveyor, many times our life safety code surveyors, if it's a 4-day survey, they may only be on site for 2 days. And so you may feel, okay, I didn't give it to the life safety code surveyor. This is the person that requested it, but I gave it to a clinical surveyor on day 4. That will be considered late. So so those are the 3 avenues. Outside a survey event, you can always submit a question. Some of you have probably experienced that with me. And it is not uncommon, although she's not here. Danielle, you've reached out through Danielle McGeary. Hey, Herman, someone has a question. Would you mind responding to it? I have no problem responding to that. But actually, if you use our formal process, that way it's recorded. And actually, when you record that question, and believe it or not, we get a bunch of the same questions. Our team, my team at the central office, can do a search, and we can see how that specific scenario or question was addressed in the past. And we want to be consistent. And so, that's another reason why use all the tools that you have if you are representing one of our accredited customers or if you're an accredited customers.
Okay, I didn't know about the database of past questions.
Yeah,
That's a new one for me. Okay, great.
So yeah, I can look up, sterilizers or ventilators.
Okay.
And I can see, we had over the past year and a half, we had X amount of questions on ventilators. And these were the particular questions that our customers had.
Okay, great. Good to know. Thank you. Okay, next question. This person says, I've been asked the following question regarding CMS S&C 1407. How do you define imaging radiology equipment? And I'm assuming what they're asking is, is it considered imaging? Is it for diagnostic or therapeutic equipment? Both, whatever. Can you provide some guidance relative to AEM exclusions on that?
Sure. So let me create some additional context for this question, and it comes at the end. That was asked in terms of AEM. One of the provisions of the AEM, or having an alternate equipment maintenance program, is that you cannot include lasers and imaging equipment. And so the basis of this question is, well, how do I find imaging or radiology equipment? Mm-hmm. Well, I did some research. Our glossary does not contain a definition, nor is there a reference source that I found, a recognized reference source that can have a definition. So my guidance on this question is come up with something. It's almost a matter of, develop a policy of what you consider. Now, we're going to assume it's going to be a reasonable policy or some guidance within your organization of what's radiology or imaging equipment. And it should probably, and it would be expected to follow general industry guidelines. So although we don't have a Joint Commission glossary definition, and like I said, I haven't found an official reference like through NFPA or something similar. Maybe you touch base with the American College of Radiology or something else and have something that appears to be, it would follow the reasonable standard. A reasonable person could understand that and develop that as your policy.
There might be some more questions about that at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so why can items be placed on the top shelf if it's against the wall, but cannot if it's not along the wall? And then this person says that this presents us with storage issues in our maintenance shops. And I can kind of figure out why this might be a problem, but
sure.
I'll let you.
Sure. So this is not an HTM question, but it's an issue that we have in storage areas. And the point of it, and so really the basis of this is that it's blocking the spray pattern of a sprinkler head, all right? So you will, if you didn't know, you should know that, my role at the Joint Commission encompasses more than the HTM world. Also the life safety codes and standards and environment of care issues. And so according to the life safety code and some of the subcodes that feed into that, sprinkler heads have a dedicated spray pattern, right? And we want to minimize the risk for a fire emergency. And so if you have storage that is too close, specifically within 18 inches of a sprinkler head, you will disrupt that spray pattern. And so, that's really what it boils down to. It's not a matter of we don't want you to store things or of that nature. It's a matter of, the code says that a sprinkler head cannot be blocked. And so we want to make sure that you don't obstruct that spray pattern.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is a big one. This week we could talk all day on this one, probably. Does TJC have any updates around any elements of performance for cybersecurity from last year's presentation?
Sure. Boy, have I fielded a lot of questions about this. Cybersecurity, that's very topical.
It's a hot topic, for sure.
Very topical.
Hot topic.
So last AAMI Exchange, I did announce that probably within a week of the exchange, I would be an observer and that the Joint Commission was going to be conducting a technical advisory panel specific to medical equipment cybersecurity. Well, that panel convened, had an exchange of a lot of information, but in terms of our any effort that we have towards medical equipment cybersecurity, we have put that on pause. And I'll tell you a couple reasons why and give you some more information. We have a relatively new CEO at the Joint Commission, Dr. John Perlin. And Dr. Perlin has come out publicly and announced that he wants to ease the accreditation burden for our organizations. He has these focus groups with your CEOs, and none of them are asking for more accreditation requirements, right? And you can imagine that because it takes more resources from your organizations. And so, if possible, if we can remove or eliminate one of our requirements or any of our requirements that don't crosswalk to a condition of participation, we're going to look at doing it. So you can imagine, if you look at the president's objectives or his goals and adding new requirements, and by the way, although the Office of Inspector General has made a recommendation that CMS have a medical equipment cybersecurity guidance, right? That has not occurred. And so we would be put in position of creating a medical equipment requirement that does not crosswalk to a condition of participation, all right? Now, having said that, Do we care about cybersecurity? Yes, we do care about cybersecurity. So going back several years now, the Joint Commission has had requirements, but it's not in our medical equipment standards, but in our information management standards. And so if you have a copy of the manual, I think it's under IM for information management 020103, if I'm correct. And there are about I think there's at least 3 elements of performance that calls for organizations to have processes, policies and processes in place to deal with protected health information. Now, is that medical equipment specific? No. And if you've heard me speak prior to the AAMI Exchange last year, my thought process was, boy, someone is looking for a medical equipment one. There are so many portals within the healthcare environment for attack. If we focus on medical equipment, would we leave something else vulnerable, or how do we capture that whole environment? And a part of me still has a feeling that way, but I'm waiting for CMS to come up with further guidance, because what I found out is if it's always best to at least establish their guidance as a frame of reference and then go from there. So in terms, just to answer the question, no, we do not have any medical equipment, cybersecurity requirements. We have general protected health information requirements and security requirements, and we've paused any further work based on the technical advisory panel.
Okay. So, if I could summarize it, I'm understanding what you're saying. You're basically, Joint Commission doesn't want to come out with anything that might be contradictory to something that CMS could come out with after the fact.
Or get ahead of ourselves.
Right, exactly. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is a good one. What are the documentation requirements for departments or services that are outsourced?
They are the same for those that are not outsourced. All right? So please understand the role of an accrediting organization is to make sure that you are compliant with the conditions of participation, right? And so whether or not you're outsourced or not, you are taking care, that organization is taking care of patients. It's still the organization's patients. And your organization is receiving reimbursement from the federal government for your patients. So there's not an allowance for, whether or not the services that you provide for medical equipment management is outsourced or not. They are the same requirements.
Okay, good one. So if a hospital is contracted with a third party, an ISO, or a manufacturer, they have to get the documentation from them.
They have to have the same documentation. Okay. You have to have your inventory. You have to have your preventive maintenance completed. You have to do all the things that, any in-house would do. Okay. Quite frankly, I think even if we reflect on it, even in-house programs outsource something, right? If it's not some degree of maybe imaging equipment or lab equipment or something of that. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So this person submitted a question. It says, life safety code surveyors are by and large facility specialists. Are there any thoughts to add life safety surveyors that have a clinical engineering background in the future?
Sure. So let me answer this by saying we don't exclude anyone with a clinical engineering background. I am not a surveyor, but and I work at central office, but as you know, I got my start in healthcare, in the Biomed department, right? So we don't exclude anybody. And this is going to touch on something on a question I have further down the road. We don't exclude anyone. The issue is you have to have knowledge of the life safety code and NFPA, the healthcare facilities code. So we do have surveyors that do have an HTM or Biomed background. They had just educated themselves on the general codes that can govern the physical environment of hospitals. So let me give you an analogy. It's kind of like saying, thinking, well, do you exclude someone if they, in your department, if they didn't come to you from a certain background? No, you wouldn't, right? You would take someone if they came from an OEM, if they came out of school, if they came from the military, as long as they were competent or just demonstrated that they can pick up the information. So, as I said, we don't exclude someone as long as you know that you can pick up the information of managing or evaluating the physical environment of a healthcare facility. Come on aboard.
Thank you. Okay, next question. So with vendors facing challenges still with staffing and parts, does this affect our PM metrics, and is there a current waiver?
There was a waiver. It ended May the 11th. All right? So the public health emergency, started 3 years ago, and between March the 1st, 2000, and May the 11th, 2023, there was a waiver in place that, if you were, we would not be punitive or overly punitive if you did not meet your maintenance requirements. There was no grace period after May the 11th. This was communicated probably at least 90 days prior. And so we'd even asked our contacts in Baltimore whether or not there would be some type of grace period, and none was issued. So, it's going back to the pre-pandemic waivers of, there is no waiver.
Okay, good to know. But if people have concerns about this, make sure you check out the AAMI PM guide that is free to download and also kind of goes into this and how you can make sure you're compliant. Right, okay. So this other question is very similar. So this one person says, we are facing parts, oops, let me check, there we go. Okay, we are also facing parts availability shortage for older equipment. Third-party vendors are unable to source parts, so are 3D printings of parts considered as an accepted possibility in the future?
In the future, I don't know. I'm going to say that's probably going to be subject to the FDA. I've had, when I do these, speaking engagements, I've had a person tell me that they've done 3D parts, but they're just for aesthetics, broken handles or cases or that. I am not aware of anybody doing any internal parts. And I would imagine that the FDA would have to provide guidance, because at what point do you cross the line and become a remanufacturer? And that's not the role of the Joint Commission. But that's a very valid question, because I can see that possibly happening. But no, unless we get guidance, so let me answer it in the affirmative. If one of our surveyors from the field called to the central office and said, Herman, this is an organization that has used 3D printing to remake a case, or an external part, or an external accessory, I would ask a few questions probably. Have they changed the use of the device? No. Does it, change the function? No. Is it primarily just an aesthetic or the case? Yes. I'd let it go.
Okay, thank you. So I think this is our final question that was submitted in advance, and then we will open it up to audience. So on behalf of all the students graduating, what information or sources of information would be most beneficial for new employees in the field?
Great question. So we've had a couple issues that kind of touched on this. So at lunch a couple days ago, I don't know if that person's still here, someone asked me a question. They said, well, one of my colleagues wanted to ask, Herman, how did you get your job? and I went through the long story of it. But I'll give you some of that long story. I started off, obviously, in the biomed world. And one of my director said, Herman, the Joint Commission is coming. Why don't you gather the paperwork that they're going to be looking at? Make sure you have our inventory, make sure we have the recalls, make sure we have PM completion, that type of paperwork. Little did I know, 30-something years later, I would be giving the same talk to you all. So, moved on from that job, went to another job, and they were looking for someone to chair the safety committee. And they said, Herman, why don't you do it? And so I did it. And so I was a point person for the Joint Commission. I had to work with my colleagues to gather all the paperwork that we needed and the documentation. Then as I went to another hospital, it was like, oh, you were the safety chair at that hospital? Well, you're going to do it here. And it's not that I didn't enjoy it. I found myself having an affinity for that information. And so let me talk about a couple points that I think is important to new folks, or no matter where you are in your career. When I look at it, I had more opportunities. So by not being myopic, what do I mean by that? You start off in your career, probably you maybe had an affinity for working on mechanical devices or just tinkering with things. And so you got good at it. And maybe you got better at it than your colleagues. So you were a supervisor. Then you're great at it, you matured, and you became a manager. Well, at some point, when I say don't be myopic, it's not about managing a task or the task of a few. It becomes, how do you observe how your department interacts and interfaces with the rest of the hospital? And then you go, well, what are the challenges that the hospital faces in the healthcare industry? And so that's what I mean by don't be myopic, right? Don't just focus on your bench. Focus on your department, healthcare, and the industry. Another thing, and I'll give credit to Brian Hawkins, if he's still here. He has a podcast, and I listened to it last week. And the terminology that I think it may be in the label of it, or the term of it, the title of it was having a growth mindset. And that feeds in when I was talking about don't be myopic. Have a growth mindset. Focus on, of course, you want to develop the competency in what you're doing, but also focus on what you could be doing next or the other opportunities. I found myself being attracted to this field because I thought everything is going technology, but once I got into the field, I find myself having one of my strengths are for the administrative side. You may find your strength just digging deeper within the realm of what you want, or you may find yourself, you know what? I think I'd like to explore imaging equipment. I think I'm good at that. Or ventilators, or anesthesia equipment, or I want to be a supervisor. So have a growth mindset. There's another term in education, and I found out that's a term that's being used in education now, having a growth mindset. And the opposite of that, all right, is don't have a deficit mindset. What's a deficit mindset? That is, I don't have this skill, I don't have this capability, so I'm going to engage in self-limiting behavior. Please do not engage in self-limiting behavior. Trust me. If those of you, I love the diversity that I see. Folks are getting younger and younger.
We're getting older.
Or I'm getting older and older. I laugh when everyone talks about the graying of the field. I'm like, well, sometimes it doesn't gray, it just goes away, all right? But especially I'm talking to the young folks, all right? And I hope I can say that. Have a growth mindset. Don't have a deficit mindset. Trust me. And for those of us who are more mature, right? If you see something in a young person, be an encourager. Be known as being the great encourager. Sometimes, boy, I am so grateful for people who saw something in me, right? And said, well, Herman, you may not be the most tech savvy, but you seem to be great when I give you policy work or paperwork to handle. And that's what I developed, all right? And so have a growth mindset. Don't be myopic. Look for what you can do. Boy, it's the changes in this field since I started are remarkable, all right? I remember in the turn of 2000, right? Well, many of you don't even remember Y2K. I remember dealing with
I remember
Y2K.
it. I remember
right?
it.
All right, I remember dealing with Y2K. Was that something? But I remember people in our department were going, you know what? We better start learning about computers, right? And it's phenomenal how everything is just interfaced on a network. You know, at my age, right? So about a year or so, I went and I needed to have an ultrasound. And I saw that ultrasound, and I'm like, where's the big clunky thing that I'm used to? This little slim screen thing, I'm like, wow. So be open to ambiguity. You don't know, right? But be open to take on whatever comes your way, all right? That's my counsel. For those of us who are in the field, make it your job to encourage one or two people. You will be surprised how a kind word or some instruction will launch someone, and it will put them on their way to career success. So that's it.
Thank you, yeah. And I also wanted to add, if we have some younger folks in the room or some students, AAMI.org has a wealth of resources also. So that's a great place to start as far as getting some additional resources for career. And of course, I have to also say, certification, wonderful. We're promoting that. We'd like to get more and more people certified in our field. So that is great. So I think we do have some time to open it up to the audience if we have some questions. And there's a couple of microphones there, and I see somebody coming down to ask their big question. Yeah. If you wouldn't mind just kind of letting us know your name.
Tony Dodge, Ohio Health in Ohio. Just out of curiosity, let's say that someone's been cited on something due to the conditions of participation. Do you keep track of trends of that? So if it's not just this hospital or this hospital system or maybe numerous hospital systems, to see if either there's an issue with that COP or if there's maybe something that's being missed by multiple groups?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we have a research department at the Joint Commission, and if there's a specific question or an issue that we want to trend, we have a director of research. We have a bunch of research scientists, and we'll say, hey, we believe such and thus may be an issue. Yes, so we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Michael McDonald from the Department of VA, Veterans Affairs in Vision 20. Question about cybersecurity and AEMs. If the OEM doesn't have any guidance about patching or doing that, and you want to schedule the patching, would that be considered an AEM, or would that be just a separate scheduled activity of making up with that?
Sure. So within the context of what we look for, we don't focus on the patching. We look at the discrete medical device. So let's talk about infusion pumps, all right? If infusion pumps, your manufacturer says this is the requirement, and you go, well, we've done the risk assessment, we've done all the things we need to do, and to put the infusion pumps on an AEM, we would look at that for the maintenance of the infusion pumps. The survey process, and I think even our competitors would say this, that it is outside the scope of the survey process to go to that level of detail. We evaluate your processes, and for the most part, your policies and your process against our elements of performance, and to see that something that's not even a part of what the medical device, the discrete medical device, is beyond that.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. Hi, Herman. Elkin Laramie here, San Francisco General Hospital. A quick question regarding research equipment. So we work closely with UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, and sometimes doctors, researchers bring their research equipment on site. That equipment is used sometimes for patient care, and sometimes we do put our own control numbers, but with a R to indicate that they're research equipment. Would we be liable, say, if a surveyor would come on site and find it in a clinical area? Is that a responsibility that would we fall under Biomed, or is that something we have to indicate in our policy as to how we would manage those types of equipment?
Sure. So one of the things, so let me apologize sometimes, and sometimes folks think I'm being difficult. I'm not. When I have to deconstruct what people say, we don't have accreditation requirements for research equipment. What we do will say is if you're using patient care equipment on your patients, regardless what you call it, you need to have a way to make sure it's safe. So when you say research, when a person says research, I've worked at hospitals that have research areas, and there are research areas we don't accredit research areas. Does that make sense? We accredit acute care hospitals, critical access hospitals. So we're accrediting your hospital. Now, for me to digest your question, I'm saying you brought in a loaner piece of equipment. And you need to have a process. If you're using, regardless of its source, if you're using a piece of equipment on a patient in an accredited facility, you have to make sure it's safe. And we will cite the organization. Whether or not we will cite the organization because the organization is supposed to have a process for making sure anything being used on their patients is safe.
Thank you.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. 2 folks that are standing up there.
Great. Good morning. Charles Wickens from Mayo Clinic. Just would like to get your comments on perhaps sustainability and where that may fit in, perhaps down the road with that being an element of participation or not. I'd like to get your perspective on that. Thank you.
Sure. So sustainability. With respect to HTM, I guess the opportunity is with anesthesia equipment and leakage of gas. We sent out a survey earlier this year, and we did a survey and reached out to the field about creating a new leadership requirement for sustainability. And that is paused. That went over like a lead balloon, all right? I'm being very candid with you. So that's paused. We're looking, so our CEO is also looking at the survey of the future. And although it wouldn't be, he's looking, it's not going to be a requirement, but can we make it something like a certification or above and beyond that we could recognize organizations that go above and beyond the standards for having these, initiatives in place. But right now, you won't be evaluated on it for accreditation.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, last question. Oh, this is going to be a toughie, I can tell already.
No, it's just that my name is Heidi. Being same way with Sodexo HTM. Herman, you really gave me a bomb of surprise, talking about revising all the standards that are maybe not directly related to the COP. It comes to mind that you have a host of clauses, specific mentions. For example, high-risk equipment, that's not in the COP. Not even 100% PM completion, I don't think it's in the COP. And so, are you really trying to talk me into hibernating cove inside the Area 51 or something like that? Because I don't know how to react to this. Are you really serious that you are going to remove everything that is not explicitly called for by the COP? Because COP is basically one sentence.
You're correct.
Ineffective, that's it.
You are correct in that the COP does not have a lot of specificity. The COPs don't. So let me address high risk versus non-high risk. And some of those were part of the some of those are part of, well, let me give you some more background. Any element of performance that we have, and I think, and hopefully I qualified, I said whenever possible, we can remove it, all right? Whenever we submit or develop any element of performance, because we're an agent of CMS, they have to approve it. Unless we're making a grammatical change, we missed a period or a comma, you can you can be rest assured it has to be approved by CMS. All right. So let's talk about the 100% versus not. And I've told a few of us in this audience, recaptured, I've paraphrased a conversation that I've had with our contact in Baltimore, because it comes to equipment schedules, right? And the response was, CMS does not have interval schedules, equipment schedules. The only thing we can go off of is what the code says, meaning NFPA, or the manufacturer says, all right? And so the expectation from CMS is that it's 100%. I would have to do some research to my predecessor about how they got into the high risk versus non-high risk. But the expectation is that everything, I don't know if there's a COP that says that, but that's the expectation of CMS, is that it's 100%. What is the second part of your question? So I hope I've addressed that.
Well, that was just an example.
Okay.
Service manuals, for example, is a specific clause that obviously is not in the COP.
Correct. And so,
There's a whole bunch of them.
yeah, so the service manual, that was never, I would say on the HCM side, I don't think that gets scored a lot. That's because I remember our research department, I think, presenting that to us. That is put in actually to help the folks in this audience.
Yes.
That was put in so you can go to your supply chain and try to use that as leverage when you're acquiring equipment. It was not meant to be punitive to the folks in the audience. It was meant to be helpful.
But now it's gone.
I had to look. Like I said, you remember I said, give us a chance when you make a call to the office to do some research. I'm a know-it-all, but I don't know it all.
Yep.
So I have to refer to the manual for some of these questions.
No problem, Herman. I'm going to make room in my cave for you to come in.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben saying yes. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our questions. And Herman, this has been incredibly informative. And I know I speak for the audience and all of AAMI. We just appreciate you coming out and talking to everyone and answering some of these questions. I know people will have more next year, so come out to Phoenix and get your questions ready.
Thank you.
Okay,
It was my
thank you.
pleasure.